They were right. They said that the earth was getting too warm, that the oceans were going to flood, and that we would be at the mercy of the elements. That was before my parents' time, though. Even before my grandparents' time. My great-great-great-grandparents were one of the first of their generation to take to the seas. The land was disappearing and it could no longer support the population of the earth. They began to take boats that were made for a vacation and outfit them for sustainability. Tennis courts, whatever those were, became small fields for micro-farms. Eventually we built larger floating farms that sit in the middle of the grouping of ships. It's hard to keep these farms going because we must desalinate the water used to keep the crops alive. The swimming pools were made into holding tanks for keeping fish fresh. Our fishing parties go out every day, looking for tuna and other large fish to bring back to the city. Ballrooms became huge communal sleeping areas where the poor would sleep since they could not afford a private room. These ships were brought together and welded into giant, floating cities with different districts on the individual boats. Some people chose to take smaller personal boats and survive with their families alone. Still others went and took oil rigs and changed them into something like a farming village. These were able to sustain much more crops than our cities. Sometimes our cities find them, and we will trade with them, just like when we come into contact with another city. Whenever we meet another city, there are trades of people too. We know that if we don't have enough diversity that our genetics will become muddy and contaminated. Most of the people who trade ships are willing. Others are taken based on lottery if we don't have enough chain ships at each meeting. That's how I came to be here on New Miami. I was chosen because I'm young, strong and good with my hands. We need people who can service the ships. My father taught me everything that I know about keeping the motors running. That's not my only job, but it's the biggest one. If we can't follow the schools of fish, then we can't support the ship. I work on basically any technical part of the ship. Fuel ran out long before my time, so the old bulky engines were dismantled and used for other things. Much of the metal was melted down and used for fishing spears and knives. In place of that, the past generations had become very good at making solar power a more viable option for our motors. Almost every spare surface on our city is covered in panels. We have a lot of motors on each ship, which when combined with every other ship is enough to keep us moving. Usually we can outrun storms we see coming, but if we can't, the cities are big enough that we won't capsize unless a hurricane happens to find us. Most of the workers are fishers, some are farmers, and some are cooks or medical. We don't have a lot of diversity in our workers. Somehow it's kept crime to a minimum. Or maybe that's because if you commit a crime, we don't imprison you. We don't have the resources to keep someone who can't contribute to the city. We throw you overboard. While most everyone in the city is a great swimmer, you can only keep your head above water for so long, without rest. And that's if something else doesn't find you first. The predators of the oceans have changed in the years since the flooding. Some died off completely, some thrived, and some became something else. Most predators just got bigger. With so much ocean and so much more fish, why wouldn't they? But there were other things. Stories of huge beasts sinking ships and taking bites out of the cities have circulated, but nothing has ever been proven. Tales of colossal swarms of sharks chasing the smaller floating cities or the single-family boats. Barracudas the size of canoes terrorizing the diving parties. Killer whales became smarter and coincidentally crueler. If they caught a swimmer, they wouldn't kill them right away. They would play with them and make them scream for help. When help came, more of the beasts would swoop in from below to take as many of the rescuers as possible. They would capsize our smaller boats to get to the juicy morsels inside. Thankfully, we have learned to adapt to no longer being the apex predator around. Some of the ships that came from the areas that used to be Europe and the Middle East came with falcons and hawks and some eagles. They have been trained to fly high above our fishing parties and give warning of any large predators coming our way. Dolphins were also our allies and acted as our warning system for many dangers. They offered more warning of dangers below that the birds could not see. We fed them some of the fish we caught, and they would follow us and give a shrill cry as warning of coming predators. Depending on what it was, they would even help us drive it off. Most of the time we come away from these encounters without loss. Other times we will come up against a particularly vicious or intelligent creature, and we will be forced to watch as one or more of our party members are dragged screaming into the depths. None of us dare go into the water after them, that is a death sentence. I mostly stay on the city ships to take care of technical problems. If a motor stops running, I have to go into the water to find out what has caused it to malfunction. Most of the time it's simply a clam or barnacle that has wedged itself into the prop, somehow, and caused it to quit. The propellers are still quite large, but it doesn't take much to get them to stop. They have an auto-stop feature built in so that they don't damage themselves if something gets caught in them. If I am summoned to the bridge, then I know that I'm going into the water to fix whatever has gone wrong, and then start the motor running again. Thankfully, I'm not the only technician aboard this ship. There are 15 districts in New Miami, and each district has at least 20 motors, if not more. Usually once or twice a day I am called to service a motor, or the lines running from the large batteries connected to the solar panels. The work itself isn't dangerous, but we still take a few guards with us to ward off predators and to watch our backs. Yesterday, I saw something that made me want to quit my job and stay out of the water for good. I had been called to service one of the motors at the back of the ship. I contacted the 3 men who typically went into the water with me and grabbed my gear. I met them at the ladder leading over the side to where the stopped engine was. Usually they carry a fishing spear and diving knives. We rarely have problems on this end of the city. We are near the front of the group, and the motor being at the back of the ship put it inside the relative safety of the ring of ships. Today, however, there had been sightings of a large pod of killer whales within a mile of the city, so they were armed with spear guns and multiple harpoons apiece. My gear was strapped on my body so that I didn't have to worry about a bag getting in my way. I also had a few diving knives strapped on among my tools, just in case. We began the climb down the ladder to the waves lapping at the hull of our home. We entered the water, and the 3 men with me, Morik, Damon and Eli, fanned out to keep an eye on the water surrounding us. We didn't take any diving gear other than our masks. Over the years of living on the water, humanity had developed the ability to hold our breath for a much longer time than previously possible. We would most likely only be under for a few minutes, and that was not going to be a problem for any of us. As soon as I was submerged, I knew something was wrong. There was something off about the feel of the water. Nothing I could describe, though. I could tell that the other men were also feeling something strange. I wasted no time in getting to the motor to see what was wrong. I opened up the access hatch and began my search. All of the fuses were in working order, there was no frayed wires, nothing that I could see being wrong from the inside. I knew that it had to be something lodged in the prop housing. It had only taken me about 2 minutes to do my first check, so I knew that I was okay to keep checking for a couple minutes. Usually a mollusk of some kind, or the body of some sea creatures, has become stuck in the prop. Rarely we would get a piece of driftwood, which was always a good day for me. Real wood is worth a fortune anymore. I was hoping for a moderate piece of the stuff as I stuff my hand into the prop after throwing the emergency brake. My hand was finding nothing, and I had made it halfway around the prop, then my hand hit it. It was hard, and felt mostly smooth. It wasn't a clam, I was sure of that much. It wasn't a body of some sea creature either. Too hard, and too smooth. But it was really jammed in there. I slid a pry bar out of its spot on my thigh. Wriggling my body around to get the best angle on this thing, I placed the pry bar into the darkness against the object and started attempting to get it out. I heard some kind of movement behind me, and checked over my shoulder. Morik was signaling that he had seen something to the 2 others. He didn't follow the signal with another that would tell us what it was, though. That was unusual because Morik was one of the best at identifying sea creatures, even with only a small glimpse of it. He could read the animal's behavior and was almost always right on its identity. Neither Damon or Eli offered a sign either. I went back to my work. These men had kept me safe on every dive I had ever been on with them. I wasn't afraid that was going to change now. The object was slowly coming out, grinding on the housing the entire way. I still couldn't see it in the darkness of the water, but it was close. I strained and pulled and twisted my pry bar until the object popped free. It began to sink very quickly, but I was able to grab it on the way down. I brought it to my face for a better look. I had seen only a few of these in my life. They weren't nearly as common as it used to be, seeing as how now they were only found on the bottom of the ocean. I held a stone in my hand. As I gazed upon it in wonder, calculating how much I could get for one of these since they were so rare, my stomach dropped. Rocks don't float. There was only one way that a rock could have gotten into the housing. Something had to put it there. My mind went into overdrive as I considered what creature could have possibly put it in there. I had never heard of any of the more intelligent predators doing anything like this. Attacking the ship or using a swimmer as bait, yes, but never this level of sabotage. Before I could turn around, I heard a hiss and a thunk echo through the water. It sounded like one of my guards had fired his spear gun and struck his target. I whipped my head around and found something completely different. A spear protruded from Eli's gut, the barbed tip pushing through the skin of his back. It looked like it was made from bone, with the shaft being formed of some kind of coral. A rope made from what appeared to be woven seaweed led from the end of the spear straight into the darkness below us. I could see his face as he turned slowly to look at us with his hands wrapped around the shaft of the spear. No one moved for a moment, so profound was our shock. The first bit of red was leaking from the wound when there was a jerk on the rope and Eli was dragged straight down. Immediately Morik and Damon put their backs to the surface and pointed their spear guns straight down with one hand while drawing a large diving knife with the other hand. Both then locked the knives onto the ends of their spear guns, like the bayonets of the old world. Once that was done, they drew another knife each to keep in their hands. I was still in such a state of shock that I hadn't moved. We had seen Eli disappear into the depths, but now we could see several shapes swimming swiftly just outside the range of our vision. Damon was shaking as he pointed his spear gun towards this new threat. These dark shapes looked like the great barracudas that stalked the oceans, except slightly smaller. But there was something else. As we watched and waited for the next move, the shapes continued to circle below us, staying just beyond where our vision would go. They were moving very quickly, putting on bursts of speed to whip through the water faster than most fish could. The shape was wrong though. The heads weren't long enough, and something was different about the fins. The shapes came circling closer and closer until I could make out what I was truly seeing. They resembled fish, scaly skin and tails that thrashed side to side to propel them through the water, along with gills. But that is where the similarities ended. Instead of fins coming off of their sides, there were arms, or something like arms. Their heads were grotesque, with 2 eyes and a mouth, but the shape was not human. The eyes were large and black, with no pupils or irises to speak of. They reminded me of shark's eyes, cruel and piercing. The mouth was incredibly wide and filled with needle-like teeth. Even more disconcerting was the fact that each of these creatures was clutching a spear similar to the one that took Eli. Attached to each spear was a length of rope woven of seaweed and kelp. There were at least 6 of the creatures that I could see, and they were hunting us. As they came closer, Mark fired his spear gun at the closest beast in an attempt to scare it off. His shot was true, but it was too fast. The thing thrashed its tail and the shot fell harmlessly away. They were getting closer and there were more of them coming out of the depths. Damon took a shot, and by some stroke of luck, hit one of the beasts. The spear pierced its chest and it began to thrash and slowly sink. This seemed to infuriate the other creatures, and spears came flying fast, incredibly fast. They shouldn't have been able to throw the spears that fast underwater without help, but as I watched they continued to hurl the spears with immense speed and uncanny accuracy. Both Damon and Morik were pierced multiple times through the limbs and torso. The ropes led back to the creatures' hands, and they began to drag my companions down to their doom, and I was powerless to help them. They thrashed and screamed, but all I could hear was the bubbles escaping their mouths. As they got further away from the boat, some of the creatures dashed away from the group and swam, close passes by the men. Each time they came close enough their teeth flashed out and a piece of the men would be ripped free and swallowed. The water reddened as more and more of the abominations fed on my former companions. Suddenly I realized that my lungs were burning and that I hadn't yet moved. I was mostly being ignored as the feeding frenzy increased in intensity below me. I had to move, I had to get away from this if only to warn the rest of the city about what I had seen. I began swimming as quickly but calmly as I could as to not attract their attention. I was 30 yards from the ladder when I checked over my shoulder and saw a lone beast slowly stalking me through the water. It almost looked like it was smiling, like it knew that there was no way that I could outswim it on my best day. I drew my knife as if it would give me any protection against this monster. I was 30 yards from the ladder and I checked over my shoulder again. It was right behind me, one arm stretched towards me. My lungs ached for a breath and my heart beat harder and faster than I could ever remember. I spun as it reached me, its nail sinking into the bicep of my left arm. The pain was excruciating, but it gave me the boost I needed. I drove my knife forward as hard I could as the thing's mouth opened to take a bite out of me. The tip of my blade pierced the roof of its mouth and drove further up into its brain. The grip on my arm tightened for a fraction of a second and then released completely as the creature slid back into the depths. I was bleeding and needed to get out of the water. I found the lowest rung of the ladder with my good arm and hauled myself out of the water as quickly as I could. I don't know how I made it up to the top of the ladder. I just knew that I needed to get away from the water. Those things were smart, they had baited us in, and they were much stronger than us. I made it over the top of the ladder and unceremoniously flopped over onto the deck. As consciousness was escaping me, I saw people running towards me and I heard screaming. When I woke up, I was in a medical bed with bandages on my arm. When one of the attendants noticed I was awake, she ran for the security officer on duty. I was questioned thoroughly about what happened when I was down below. I told them everything that I had seen. They were skeptical at first, but the fact that I didn't come back with any of the 3 men sent with me as protection. The puncture wounds on my arm appeared to come from a human-shaped hand, and that added to my credibility as well. The more they listened to me, the more concerned their faces became. They instructed me to not tell anyone about this so as to not spread panic, so I wrote it down and cast the note into the sea inside a small waterproof box. If you are reading this, know that your city is in danger. In the days following the attack, I noticed more and more of our fishing crews coming back with no fish or missing crew members. We need to find land or shallow water where we can see them coming. They are too smart for us. They are not fish, they are not man. They are something different. The mermaids of myth were said to be beautiful and use their beauty to lure men to their death. They were wrong about the beautiful part. The lure men to their deaths part. They were right. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe.